Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Larry.
Welcome to Manopod,
A podcast dedicated to men over 50.
brought to you by manopause.com.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to a very special Manopod podcast. In World War II, the Ritchie Boys were an unsung group of heroes who helped America and the Allies win the war. Many of those 11,000 Ritchie Boys were young German Jews who had fled Nazi Germany, and because of their knowledge of the language and culture, they were recruited and trained in intelligence gathering and interrogation techniques. Many of them entered Germany on D-Day as part of the Normandy invasion. They were so successful that they provided over 60% of the actionable intelligence on the battlefield. We are honored to have as our guest today Mr. Herb Murez, an original Ritchie boy going strong at 98 years old.
Thank you.
Welcome, Herb.
Thank you. It's nice being here. And about Richie, let me first tell you about an information source which is vastly superior to my own. There is a book, and this is a copy of the jacket by a lady by the name of Beverly Driver Eddy. She's an academician someplace at a college or university back east, and she is accumulating biographical material, and she's written a book, and as I understand it, that she's working on having Camp Ritchie now transformed into a museum.
Wow.
And there'll be biographies and exhibits and everything that ties in with the memory of the Ritchie Boys. That'll be there.
Nice.
So,
We'll put that on so that people can know where to order that book.
Yeah.
That sounds really
Yeah,
informative.
here, well, I'll take that. Thanks.
okay, you can keep it.
Oh, thank you.
You can keep it.
Speaking of Camp Ritchie, did you know about Camp Ritchie before you joined the Army?
Not before I joined the Army. And there's a good reason for it, because you were taught very early on in your Camp Ritchie experience, and very definitely, you don't talk about this. And one of the ground principles of all intelligence is you keep the knowledge and the information to whoever needs it.
Right.
Loose
And who's
lips
allowed to? That's
sink
right.
ships.
That's right. That's right.
Say that 3 times.
Yeah.
So many of the Ritchie boys were immigrants from Germany, Austria. And when did you come over and how did you get involved with all this?
I had come to Los Angeles in about April of 1939. And
Did you speak English at the time?
yes, I spoke some English. I didn't speak as well as I speak now, but we had at home in Austria, in Vienna before the war, we had a tutor come to the house to teach us English. That was my brother and me, because in those days in Europe, if you aspired to be even a moderately well-educated person, you knew your own language and about 2 or 3 others.
Mm-hmm. And what interested you in getting into the Army? What happened that made you want to enlist in the Army?
Well, after Pearl Harbor, the United States was in the war full blast. And there was only one thing to do, and that's to win that war, which took a lot of blood and treasure, but we won it, thank God.
Well, you obviously got into the Army, and you were recruited to Camp Ritchie after a little time spending in a different training camp,
Yeah.
and they recruited you over to Camp Ritchie. Tell us about that.
Well, I was in basic training in Camp Crowder, which is in the Arkansas, Missouri area, and it's a beautiful country, but I had less than a total enjoyment of the
In basic training, yeah.
yeah. And one fine day, the company clerk calls me over the base box and says, "Murez, come on down to the company." office. So I came down. You're being transferred to Camp Ritchie in Maryland. Start packing your stuff.
Did you know what that meant?
Well, I knew that it was had something else to do with what was going on. It was something other than the Signal Corps.
We know some of the Ritchie Boys were trained as interrogators, analysts, and spies. What was your specialty?
Analyst.
And what does that entail?
To the translation of German army and German government documents, and getting whatever information is possibly of interest to any of the Allied agencies, and extracting that, and to sometimes a lot of stuff you could cross-reference to something that we already knew. So it was an effort of building a web.
Mm-hmm. And that was mostly tactical information that was used by battalions and officers actually on the battlefield to know where the guns were, where the tanks were, that sort of thing, yes?
That was the tactical end of it.
Uh-huh.
That was the prisoner of war interrogation. And that was probably the biggest single part of the intelligence gathering effort. Documents of a more strategic, long-range significance, they went into analysis to extract information about them. But at the battlefield level, that was the most important and the most effective, because there was techniques to extract information that was of immediate value.
Mm-hmm. We understand that you were trained as an interrogator,
Yeah.
and one of the jobs as an interrogator would be to get this information from the enemy. But you guys had a different tact on how you extracted that information. One of the ways, as I understand it, is you make friends with them. It's a humane way of extracting information instead of brutal beating and going after them and attacking.
Beating is ineffective to get information. A very effective way of getting information, and I think this was touched upon in the program of 60 Minutes, which gave a lot of publicity to the Ritchie experience. Anyway, a very effective way was to threaten them of being turned over to the Russians, because the German prisoners had very good reason to be afraid of the Russians. They had very good reasons. So they would rather talk than face the possibility of being turned over to the Russians.
So now, a lot of us don't necessarily know the value of an experience while we're going through it. You've obviously had time to reflect on what you did back then. Did you have a sense back then of how important the work was that you were doing?
It kind of grew on me as we went into it, because I could see that to win the war, you had to know all you could about the enemy.
So Herb, over the years, there's been some attempt to try and water down the significance of the Holocaust and World War II to the point where there's a significant number of people who either don't know about it or those who do deny that it ever happened. Have you been seeing that?
I know that it is happening. I haven't had any personal contact with it, but I know it's happening. When Dachau was liberated, and after it was made more sanitary, suitable for General Eisenhower to come and see it, had to get a lot of bodies out of the way and what have you. But he saw what had happened, and he said immediately, "Bring on the photographers, and I want photographs taken of everything, because the time will come in 50 or 75 years when somebody won't believe that it happened." And I think those photographs are now part of the National Archives. So this was directly ordered by General Eisenhower, who saw it himself.
Thankfully.
Oh. You know, you mentioned that you have just recently, I mean in the last 10 years, started talking about your experience. You're 98 years young. That means you didn't start talking about this experience until you were 88. Why?
Well, I think there's more interest in it now than there was 10 years ago.
So you go into schools and organizations to educate mostly young people about this, correct?
That's correct.
And how are they receiving it? Are they believing it? Are they understanding it? What's happening with that?
For one thing, there are a lot fewer people now who have personal knowledge
Yes.
than there were 10 years ago.
Go ahead.
So it is more important that the few of us who are left speak of what we know. Yes, it actually happened.
Yes, definitely. Now, with what's going on in the world today, with Russia declaring war on Ukraine and trying to wipe them off the map, do you think history is starting to repeat itself?
There is an inscription on the National Archives in Washington. What is past is prologue. And we see the truth of that.
You do have people, again, who may not remember what happened in World War II. So what you're doing, I think, is invaluable.
I mean, the vast majority of people, to them, World War II is a textbook story.
Right.
And maybe a movie or a distant relative was involved in it.
Do you stay in touch with any of the Ritchie Boys, some of your buddies that you were in the camp with?
Any of the people that I personally knew from my organization, but I don't have any contact with them anymore. I did for a while, but the Grim Reaper took care of that.
Yeah. But I mean, look at you, 98, and some of the guys that were on 60 Minutes a few months ago, they're all in their late 90s, and one was approaching 100. I mean, was there something in the water that you guys were drinking that made you live so long?
Well, look, out of 1,000 people, maybe 10 or 20 will live beyond 100. And I happen to be one of those. I haven't lived beyond 100 yet, but I'm getting close.
So what's your plan, say, for the next 10 years? Are you going to keep doing this? Are you going to write a book? What kind of stuff are you going to do?
I'm going to keep talking as long as I can talk.
So Herb, thank you so much for everything you've done for Americans, for everybody in the whole human race. We appreciate it, and we're honored that you're here to share your story with us.
I'm thankful for the invitation. I didn't do all I could have, but I did what came to me to do.
You made a difference, and that's what matters.
I hope so.
Thank you
So
so
thanks
much
for being with us.
You're more than welcome. My pleasure.